All right. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Xavier Duran. I am the Adult Programming Coordinator for the Lisle Library District. A couple of things before we begin. During the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll go ahead and let Rick Graffagna know that we have some questions, and then we'll go ahead and answer those on the air during our Zoom presentation. Second thing, speaking of Zoom, in the event that we do enter some form of a weird kerfuffle because of the nature of technology, please give us a minute or two to figure things out, and then we'll go ahead and continue with our wonderful Zoom presentation. Lastly, if you, I sent you a program evaluation through the email. If you have not received it, I'll go ahead and send it in our chat feature, and I will go ahead and send that programming form. Lastly, for those who, either yourself or someone you know that has been having trouble getting a vaccination, the wonderful program Vaccination Buddies, presented by Naperville Senior Task Force and Naperville Lisle Township's Triad, has a phone number where you or the friend who's having trouble getting a vaccine through the senior initiative, there will be someone, a live voice, to help them. And actually, it's pretty wonderful to know that Rick Graffagna, our presenter, is heavily involved in the Vaccination Buddies. Actually, one of the person that started it. So with that, the amazing, wonderful Rick Graffagna will talk to us about senior housing. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Rick Graffagna.
Well, thank you. Amazing and wonderful. Wow, those are that's pretty high praise, Xavier. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Lisle Library for allowing me to take a little bit of your time this evening to share some information about Senior Housing 101. Again, thanks everybody for joining us and taking time out of your evening. So why don't we jump right in? And if you don't mind, we could start with just a little, hopefully what you think is a humorous story. And I'm kind of sensitive, so I'd appreciate it if you would chuckle to yourself. But so there was this group of seniors who were out on an excursion back in the pre-pandemic days. They were going on an event, and they were on a bus, and they left, and they'd been out on the road for a little bit when one of the seniors got up and approached the bus driver and tapped him on the shoulder and asked whether he enjoyed peanuts. And he says, "Sure, I sure do." And she goes, "Well, reach out your hand. I've got some peanuts for you." So he took the peanuts and ate them down and really enjoyed them. And a few minutes later, the same person approached him, tapped him on the shoulder, and gave him some more peanuts. And that repeated itself a handful of times. Finally, the woman approached the bus driver, and the bus driver said, "I really enjoy the peanuts, but you spent good money on the peanuts, and I really don't want to eat all of them." And she goes, "That's okay. The peanuts are too hard on our teeth. We can't eat them." And he goes, "Oh, well, that's too bad." He goes, "But if they're too hard on your teeth, why would you go ahead and buy peanuts?" And and the woman said, "Well, we really enjoy the chocolate around the peanuts." Bum. Anyway, so with that bad joke, we will move on. So, first of all, I'd like to start a little bit by speaking to some basic retirement type community, different financial models that exist out there. And before we really get into this, to reinforce what Xavier mentioned earlier, if you've got questions, something comes to mind that you don't understand what I said, or I didn't do a good enough job of explaining it, feel free to put that question in the chat, and Xavier will interrupt and we will address your question at that time. But then we can also talk. We'll also have time at the end for some Q&A as well. So the first type of financial model for senior housing is what we call a buy-in. Okay, and so a buy-in type of senior community is one that's going to ask for a fairly significant six-figure upfront investment, if you will, into that property. It's the entry fee, if you will, that allows you to gain access to the various levels of care and types of housing that are available on a particular campus. So typically, this six-figure amount is associated with a percentage. It might be 55%, might be 80%, might be 90%. And what that means is that percentage of that initial upfront spend at the time that you either leave the community, either under your own volition, or perhaps you pass away, that percentage will be returned either to you personally or to the beneficiaries and your estate. So for example, if you had a $200,000 buy-in and the buy-in was 80%, then $160,000 would be reimbursed to you or your estate. So what does that money get you? It really depends a lot on the community, but in general, it helps gain you access to the other levels of care. In some cases, you get preferential pricing for the other levels of care that are available in the community. And in some cases, there's a benevolent fund, or you purchase what they call a life care plan, which basically says that even if you've exhausted all of your financial resources and are no longer able to afford to pay for care and to pay for your monthly fee or rent, you can stay there. Okay. And so that's a wonderful, wonderful safety net that exists with buying communities. We'll talk a little bit more about buying communities in the next slide or two. Okay. So the second type of financial model is what I call a community fee or a rental. All right. In this particular case, the fee or the amount of upfront that you have to put out is significantly less. It might be $2,000. It might be $4,000 or $5,000. It's a one-time, typically a non-refundable fee that you pay in order to gain access to a senior housing property. And I term it as rental because you sign what looks like a 12-month agreement, and what happens is that even though you have that 12-month term, there's lots of flexibility that if you're in assisted living and you can give a 30-day notice and you're no longer financially responsible, for the agreement that you signed. So in this particular case, by law in the state of Illinois, you've got that 30-day notice is there, gives you lots of flexibility and allows you to leave, in the case of you've decided to go somewhere else, or perhaps you pass away while you're there, you're no longer financially responsible. Let's see. Next, or the last, is low income or affordable housing. This is a type of housing that can be private pay to help those that are maybe more challenged financially. In some cases, there's vouchers that are available to pay for the housing, or your rent is tied to the amount of income that you have, and again makes it much more affordable. Okay. So let's move on to different types of retirement housing communities. First off is independent living. And just by the term independent living, residents that start at this level of care are independent. Okay. They can pretty much come and go as they free. They don't really have any needs. Your typical independent living apartment can be a one bedroom, could be a two bedroom. In some, rare cases, there might be 3-bedroom apartments with multiple bathrooms, comes with a full kitchen. Your base rent not only just gets you your apartment, but gets you housekeeping, maintenance, access to laundry facilities. Some cases, there's actually a washer dryer in the apartment. Because you have a full kitchen, there's a meal plan associated that's paid for by the rent. It's typically is not 3 meals a day, but it might be 1 or 2 meals a day, or maybe 40 meals a month, served a restaurant style in a separate dining area. That monthly rent also gets you utilities, cable, sometimes the landline phone, local transportation, activities, programming. All of that is included, within that base rent for your apartment. And obviously, the more bedrooms and the larger the apartment, the higher the rent is. Next is what I call independent living with services. So, for those of you that maybe don't know, but if you haven't heard of the term activities of daily living or ADLs, some support to address your ADLs can be brought into your independent living apartment. And so some examples of activities of daily living include bathing, dressing, grooming, mobility assistance, help in the restroom for toileting purposes, medication reminders, things of that nature. Things that, when things are going well, you don't think twice about, but then all of a sudden, perhaps you need a little support or help. So some examples of some services that can be addressed in independent living would be, let's say, all of a sudden you've had a little bit of a balance issue and you're a little uncomfortable or unsteady stepping into and out of a shower. Okay. And so you can have somebody come in for a fee to be there, not necessarily to actually bathe you, but just to make sure from a safety standpoint that you get into and out of the shower safely. Another example might be perhaps you've injured your shoulder somehow, and now you have a little trouble pulling, getting dressed in the morning and getting undressed at the end of the day. Well, you can, again, hire somebody, have somebody come in to help you with that particular activity. As long as the activity that someone needs support with can be scheduled, then more than likely you're going to be able to continue to live in that independent living apartment. So as long as it's schedulable, right? So things like bathing and dressing and grooming and maybe a little mobility help to get out of your apartment to get down to the dining room. Those are all activities that can be scheduled in advance. And the person that would come in to provide that help could be one of two different people. It could be a caregiver agency that you actually hire to come into your building, or it could be a caregiver that's already an employee of the property that you live at. All right, let's move on. Next is assisted living. So assisted living really comes into play when, instead of being able to schedule all of the types of support and activities that you need help with, now you've really kind of transitioned to truly needing 24/7, never quite sure when you might need help. Oftentimes that might occur when with mobility issues or not being able to get up in order to get to the restroom in time, or frequently hitting your call button to try and call for some help or assistance to come in. Your assisted living apartment very well will be in the same complex that your independent living apartment was. Could look and feel very similar to it. Might be studio, could be a one bedroom. In some cases, it could be a two bedroom unit. Very similar size and style as I mentioned. The one big difference is that typically your assisted living apartment has a kitchenette versus a full kitchen. So a kitchenette, you have a sink and a refrigerator and probably a microwave and a countertop and some cabinets, but you don't have a full kitchen because your base rent gets you 3 meals a day. So you don't really have the need to prepare a meal because of the 3 meals that you get. Your base rent covers the same things that your rent in your IL apartment. Utilities and maintenance and housekeeping. Laundry is typically paid for and taken care of in an assisted living apartment. Local transportation, programming, activities, things of that nature are all taken care of. These properties, especially in assisted living, have nurses that are there. In many cases, they're around the clock. Sometimes, like maybe from 6 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night. One of their primary roles is to manage the medication program that residents may need. And then they also typically have oversight for the caregivers. So that's an assisted living apartment. Next is memory care. Memory care is under the same licensure as assisted living, managed by the state of Illinois. Memory care can exist in two different types of settings. One would be memory care that's offered in the same community that your independent living and assisted living apartment is. It could be a floor that's designated as memory care. It could be a wing that's identified as memory care, and all housed in that same complex. There are also standalone type of memory care buildings that all they do is memory care. That's their specialty. That's what they do. That's what they're the best at offering. So what are the differences between memory care and assisted living? Well, typically in memory care, your apartments are more likely to be a studio, maybe some one-bedroom apartments, because typically the residents don't spend a lot of time in their memory care unit. We try to have them out and about with the group, participating in activities. Um, Typically a memory care area is secured, and so that if there's a tendency for wandering, that resident would be safe and secured. It doesn't look and feel like it's a lockdown unit. It's pretty subtly managed, but you can't enter and exit without having the password or the pass like a fob to gain access. Some of the other differences are the employees, the caregivers in memory care have been specially trained to work with people that have cognitive deficits. They know how to deal with behaviors, how to manage through them. Um, the programming, the activities are specifically designed to work with people that have that cognitive shortfall, and they're designed to have them to be able to be participate in the, let me untie my tongue, to participate in the activity and feel good about doing so. Okay. So next, I want to talk about a continuing care retirement community, or short CCRC. So CCRCs kind of tie back generally to the buy-in. So typically your buy-in communities are continuing care retirement communities. And what we mean by that is that they have the full gamut of care levels. They have independent living, they have assisted living, they have memory care, and in many cases, skilled nursing on the same campus. And so when I talked before about some of the benefits of being a buy-in, that's really what I was speaking to, that you have access to these different levels of care, perhaps in priority access, and sometimes some preferential pricing that falls your way. Next is supportive living. If I was face to face, I'd ask you to raise your hand to say how many people have heard of supportive living. But supportive living is a unique, wonderful program created in the state of Illinois, and it's a senior housing. Residents have their own apartment. Could be a studio, could be a one-bedroom. Typically, is not a full kitchen. It's a kitchenette, because your base rent gets you get you 3 meals a day in the dining room. And I got to remind myself to come back and talk to something about assisted living and memory care, which I forgot, and is kind of a key component. But anyway, so supportive living. One key difference with supportive living is there's a minimum age of 65 years old in order to live there. You can have support for your ADLs as long as that ADL can be scheduled. So it's kind of similar to independent living with services. So as long as you can schedule a bath, you can schedule some mobility supports, you can schedule medication reminders, things of that nature. So your base rent gets you 3 meals a day, activities and programming, laundry, housekeeping, maintenance, similar to what we've mentioned before. From a mobility standpoint, residents need to be able to stand and to pivot in order to, even if they need get to a walker or to a wheelchair. Essentially, they need to be able to navigate through their apartment to get to the restroom to take care of their toileting needs. So that's one distinction about supportive living. The other big difference with supportive living, which makes it so great for people that are in need, is on the financial side of things. So whereas all of the options that we talked about up until this point, independent living, assisted living, memory care, and such, these are all private pay only options. In supportive living, you can pay privately. There's a monthly fee or monthly rent, if you will. But if at some point you no longer have the capacity to pay that monthly rent, you can apply for and transition to public aid, Medicaid, and remain living there. Okay. Now I want to circle back to pricing in assisted living and memory care. There's really two buckets to the cost in those areas. One bucket is the basic rent. Then the second piece is the cost of care. And that cost of care is defined by an assessment that would be done of any incoming residents. And they determine how much help they need, how much time the caregivers in that community need to spend with that resident in order to keep them safe. So there's really two pieces to it. There's the basic cost for the rent, then there's the cost of the care. In some cases, especially in the memory care arena, there are some properties that offer what we call all-inclusive pricing, where instead of having two separate pieces, the cost of care is baked into the rent, the monthly fee that you see. Okay, let's see what's next. Again, affordable senior housing, I mentioned that with the first slide. Again, this can be determined as a percentage of your income. It could be considered a help be paid for via voucher. Typically, your affordable senior housing properties are independent, not typically services that are available. Some cases there might be common dining, but most of the time you have full kitchens and the residents prepare meals themselves. A lot of times they'll have a social worker / management person in the building to help manage things for the residents. And unfortunately, we have demand is significantly higher than supply in affordable senior housing, and oftentimes there's pretty long waiting lists to gain access. And then finally, skilled nursing for both rehab and long-term. So skilled nursing, you're probably familiar with them. More typically it's called skilled nursing. Before maybe it was referred to as a nursing home. People can be there for a short period of time. Perhaps they had a fall, they injured their hip, they spent 3 midnights in the hospital and now are eligible for Medicare rehabilitation. They go into skilled nursing. They're there for a period of time. And after they've completed their rehabilitation and Medicare has deemed them to be satisfactory, they go back to their prior residence. You also have people that are in skilled nursing long term. That's what their home is. Typically, the people are there for two reasons. One is that the level of care and the type of help that they need falls outside the bounds of what licensed assisted living can offer. So things like on an IV, on a respirator, on a ventilator, a level 3 or 4 wound, on a non-self-managing feeding tube. Those types of physical maladies cannot be addressed in assisted living. They have to be addressed in skilled nursing. And the other reason that people might be there long-term is that perhaps at some point they no longer have the financial resources to pay privately, and perhaps their level of need goes beyond what supportive living can offer. So they're in a living in a skilled nursing in a long-term Medicaid bed. Okay. Any questions out there yet, Xavier?
Not at the moment. And just a reminder, you're more than welcome to put in the questions in the Q&A feature or in the chat on the Zoom toolbar. So far, we've just gotten a question about receiving a copy of this PowerPoint at the end of the program.
Yeah, I'm happy to, if they were to provide you with an email or get in touch with me, I'm happy to share that.
Sounds good. And it looks like we just got a question. What can these communities require on application for admission, i.e., toll disclosure for finances, medical, and pending legal settlements?
That's a great question. So typically in the buy-in arena, there's going to be a financial disclosure form that they're going to ask for, and they will ask for medical records. I'm not sure about the legal piece, whether that's specifically addressed, but they're going to want to see what kind of financial wherewithal you have in terms of both the ability to pay the upfront buy-in amount, and then also what requisite liquid assets exist. And they also want to have a picture of what your current health situation is. Now, in the rental arena, um, a very large majority of those properties are not going to ask for financial records or a financial disclosure statement. They're, in a sense, going to assume that you have the ability to pay privately, and that they will tell you up front, and they would ask that if at some point you get within, let's say, 6 months to 9 months of when you think your money is going to be exhausted and your ability to pay is going to come to an end, that you come and talk to them at that point, and then they can start reviewing some options for you in terms of where you can go. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. So as you're looking for senior housing, a few things to consider. I think the number one, my time working in this industry, I think the number one criteria is typically location. All right. And I'm sure most of you noticed that over the last several years, the number of senior housing properties that have uh, opened up, brand new construction, has really been pretty mind-boggling. When I started, 9 years ago plus ago, we didn't have nearly the choice that we have now. And really, from a consumer standpoint, it's a real benefit to you, that you really do have many, many more options today than we did before. And now here in the western suburbs, we really have some wonderful options, and it really gives people some choice in order to make a good decision. I think level of care and health services is really important. Understanding what the different options are that are available in the communities that you're considering, and then trying to understand, not only what are the health services that they offer, but then what are the potential medical and or cognitive issues that you may or may not be facing, right now. Lifestyle and amenities. This is going to be your new home. What do they do for fun? And so I think that's something to explore. What's the current resident population like? Are there people there that there's going to be an opportunity to develop a bunch of new friends? A handful of properties out there have swimming pools. If you like to swim, you can swim. Maybe you're really active and you like to exercise quite a bit. Well, what kind of exercise room and equipment do they have to offer? Going to a senior community can be pretty emotional and a big change in life, but you're really going there to continue your life and to continue living, and to perhaps do some things that you weren't able to do before. Obviously, cost is a factor, right? And so, as you're trying to assess where you're going to go, I think it's good to understand not only what the fee structure looks like today for you. Let's say you're moving into a rental independent living apartment and you have no needs. You may want to have just an idea of what the current pricing looks like in their assisted living. Perhaps there's early onset dementia that's taking place, and maybe you'd want to maybe have a good idea ahead of time what their memory care offering would look like. The
Oh, we
food,
have one more question.
sure.
Speaking of cost, can they require a comprehensive medical exam prior to admission at your expense?
Um, I think typically they're not going to ask for a special physical, but they will send what they call a physician's report that they're going to ask you to fill out and to have your physician sign off on. And that could vary a little bit from one community to the next. They all do everything the same, and they all do everything at the same time a little bit differently. So it's kind of hard to say, but for the buy-in, they're going to want to have an understanding of what your current medical situation is. So I mentioned the food. Quite honestly, I don't know about you, food is important to me. I enjoy food, and I have to be really honest with you. The food in senior communities is really, really good. Okay, typically it's served restaurant style in a restaurant type of an area. Full menu, specials, entrees that repeat themselves that are always available. Typically prepared on property. All fresh food. So it really is decent. Kind of tied back to what I've said before, activities and what do they do for fun? What kind of outings, pre-pandemic, and what are they actually trying to do now in terms of going to events, movies, plays? Do they go out for a meal periodically, shopping? What kind of local transportation options are there for you? Perhaps you're not driving anymore. Can they get you to medical appointments, things of that nature? I think this is a key question to ask, so what's the staffing like in the property? What's the longevity look like? How long has the senior team been in place? The executive director, the director of healthcare, the director of assisted living, and so on and so forth. What kind of ratios do they have in terms of caregiver to resident staffing? What does that look like in independent living and assisted living and memory care? What's the tenure like, and what's the training like, for the employees? Are all the caregivers in the building their own employees, or do they typically have to farm out and bring in outsiders to supplement any need that they might have? These are all good questions to ask that you should know about ahead of time. What do the buildings and the grounds look like? For me, a tour begins as soon as you turn into the parking lot. In the winter, what's the parking lot look like? Is the ice and snow well maintained? In nicer times, is what's the landscaping look like? As you're walking into the building, what do the common areas look like? Is it well maintained? Is it currently painted? Is it well lit? These are all kind of a reflection of their pride and what they think of the property that they have their residents living in. Sorry, I put food in again because I kind of enjoy food. Security and safety. What is access into the building look like? We're going to talk a little bit about life during the pandemic. But, generally speaking, when is there somebody available at the front desk? When is the front door locked? If I wanted to come to the building after normal hours, how does that work? Am I going to have my own fob, keypad? Do I call somebody in the building, and they're going to come and unlock the doors and allow me in? And from a safety standpoint, ask questions about, what do they do in emergencies? Do they have fire drills and tornado drills with the staff and the residents, so everybody knows what to do in the case of an emergency? And future needs, hopefully, life doesn't throw you a curveball, but for many cases, you do have a curveball, and life's going to change. And so you want to feel comfortable that the property that you go to, you're able to stay for as long as possible. Maybe I could circle back a little bit, on the healthcare side of things. Senior housing really can be an end of life proposition for most people. Okay. I didn't mention earlier, but if it got to the point where hospice is needed, hospice services can be brought right into your assisted living or memory care apartment. You're not going to be asked to leave at that difficult time, and that's not something that your family's going to have to worry about. If and when things got to that point for a loved one. All right. So, excuse me. So when is it time to move? Not an easy question. It's really very personal. It's really a family type of a decision. Hopefully everybody's talking out loud about if and when for yourself or for a family member, you know, if staying at home really is no longer an option or very difficult. And it will really vary from one situation to the next. Sometimes it's driven by geography. Mom and dad relocated to Florida 20 years ago, and now life has changed for them, and we need to get them closer to family to have a family safety net closer. In some cases, it's not that dramatic. Sometimes it's a matter of maybe the kids moved, and now maybe if mom and dad want to move to stay closer to the kids. Universally, safety is always a driving factor. When I'm working with adult kids and they're concerned about mom and or dad, usually it's safety, that they're waking up at night, wondering, if they're okay at home. I mentioned family geography already. And then sometimes costs, sometimes that cost of keeping somebody at home, really is a is is more costly to maintain that environment than it is to have a bigger safety net and support network in senior housing. I am all for staying at home as long as possible. My mom is 91 and she's still living in the original home and she's doing fabulous. And we know she's the exception, but I'm sure we're going to try to keep her at home for as long as we can. So I'm sure you're wondering, so what does senior housing look like today? And quite honestly, I updated this slide yesterday because every week, every couple of weeks, I'm sensing that there are things that are changing. So literally all communities are now open for business. They're being able to accept new residents. Family tours. If you're trying to consider a property, most properties are now allowing on-site visits. There may be some restrictions with that in terms of how that would take place compared to a year plus ago, but they are taking place. In some cases, they may not be allowing pre-visitation tours, but they're being conducted virtually. I mentioned earlier, an assessment oftentimes is done for people moving into assisted living and memory care and supportive living. Well, there's a combination of that's being done both virtually and face-to-face right now. The move-in process is modified, trying to maintain some safety. So if typically families can't come and visit and be there for many hours at a time, for the move-in, that's set aside and you're allowed to bring in a specific number of movers. Family members can typically be there all day to make sure that mom and dad are settled and the apartment's put together, the decorations are put up on the wall and the TV is hung properly, so on and so forth. Oh, speaking of moving things in, brain cramp. I didn't mention earlier, typically in senior housing, you furnish it with your own stuff. Okay. So it's your own furniture, it's your own belongings. You personalize it as much as possible. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. New resident isolation period is now greatly modified, where it was pretty universal not that long ago, where there was going to be an isolation period or quarantining, if you will, anywhere from 7 to 14 days. Now with most residents, seniors, most staff, and quite honestly, most new residents coming in being vaccinated, in many cases, there's not even an isolation period required. Family visitations are greatly expanded, greatly improved. In many cases, there still need to be scheduled, but can be up to an hour or 2 hours. You can go into your loved one's apartment. Typically not allowing right now, wandering through the common areas, but that is shifted pretty dramatically and, across the whole spectrum and from one property to the next. Our employee and residential help continue to be monitored. I would say that, excuse me a second. I would say that upwards of well over 90% of residents have been vaccinated. The same can be said for staff. And there is some monitoring still taking place of especially staff help. If you don't feel well, don't come to work. Activities are back. Group dining is back. Maintaining social distancing while they're doing that. But instead of activities just in the room and meals just being brought to the room and activities being isolated to just a hallway, they're, the more traditional activity setting that took place before is back in place. I think I mentioned that already. And what does the future hold? I think, I think by the end of the summer, we will be really, really close to being back to normal. Okay, as we get the herd mentality, if you will, of vaccination across the board, we'll be back up and running. At least that's what my fervent hope is. So, in senior housing, what kind of payments are accepted? Like I said, private pay, is for, virtually all of, the housing that we've spoken to up until this point. Medicaid and public aid. I spoke to two different options where that comes into play. First is supportive living, where you can, Medicaid will allow you to will pay for you to stay in supportive living, and then also long-term skilled nursing in a Medicaid. So two options in the state of Illinois where Medicaid and public aid come into play. Medicare, in senior housing, your Medicare coverage, both Medicare and your supplemental insurance are still in place. Okay, they will still take care of things like hospitalization and doctor's visits and prescription drugs and rehabilitation and stay in short-term rehabilitation. That all still continues to exist. Unfortunately, it doesn't help pay for senior housing, but it'll help pay for all of the senior housing or all of the medically related needs that you have. So how do I fund these payments? Social Security income. Hopefully you're on social. Maybe perhaps from your work history, you've got you're the beneficiary of being able to receive a pension. Savings and investments. Some people have done a marvelous job of setting money aside in order to pay for, now that pay for their long-term care and benefit. I remember I was visiting with a gentleman, this is probably 5 years ago now. He lived in a nice, a modest house in Elmhurst. And long story short, the house was worth about $300,000 and it was paid for. And I was there visiting with another person, and she was really interested. Well, what was his monthly income? It was about $4,500. And turns out that he had a pretty a great long-term care insurance policy, which we'll touch on in a couple of minutes. She wanted to know how much money he had set aside, anything stocks or investments. And he goes, yeah, I probably have about $2 million in investments. And she looked at him and said, wow, are you lucky? And he looked at her square in the eye and said, luck had nothing to do with it. So a very planful, lucky guy. So if you have a home, if you lived there a good part of your life, you've paid off the mortgage. So now you've got the equity from that home. If you decide to make a move, those proceeds can help take care of that for you. I mentioned briefly a minute ago, long-term care insurance. Very small percent of the population has long-term care. If you're one of the people that elected to start paying for that several years ago, now is the time to perhaps take advantage of it. I also, when I find a family that's got long-term care insurance, one of the first questions I say is, we'll go get that policy and try to understand what the benefit is. Typically there's a 60 to 90 day wait period. There may be a cap in terms of the total dollar amount. There might be a per diem that can be used for both for home care in the home and also for long-term and assisted living, memory care, and the like. Veterans benefits. If you're a veteran, there's a benefit called aid and attendance, which you could be eligible for if you were honorably discharged, you served during a time of war. There's a financial hurdle that comes into play, but you and your wife currently, if you're married and if you pass away, she as a surviving spouse could be eligible for this benefit.
Oh, Rick, we have a question.
Sure.
How do you appeal a negative assessment? Would this be part of the housing contract?
I'm sorry, how would I do what?
How do you appeal a negative assessment? Would this be part of the housing contract?
Yeah, if the assessment you're referring to is the physical assessment of how much care someone needs, yeah, that's kind of an open dialogue that takes place between typically the senior, in many cases it's a nurse from the community, and other family members there trying to come to an agreement, in terms of, what the amount of care is. And if for some reason it falls outside the bounds of what they're willing to manage or do, there can be some conversation to try to address that. Let me know if I did not answer that correctly. Okay.
A couple other questions.
Sure.
What is the name of the veteran benefit again? And is the spouse of the deceased eligible? How would we find out more information about the veteran benefit again?
Sure. Great. So the benefit is called aid in attendance, just like in school. And if the veteran himself would be eligible and he's passed away, more than likely the surviving spouse would be eligible. So rough and tough numbers. I think an eligible couple, the monthly benefit could be over $2,100. The veteran senior could be like $1,900, and a surviving spouse is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,300 to $1,400 a month. If someone's really interested, please reach out to me. I work with a couple of people that are veterans benefits experts, and they'd be happy to at least help you understand what your eligibility looks like.
A couple more. Sorry
Sure.
about that. It looks like you may have covered this. How do you learn about the veteran? How do you learn about the veterans aid and assessment?
Yeah, again, people can just reach out to me, and I'm happy to share some information from some long-term people that have been helping families for over 15 years with the benefits. They can help you. Okay, lines of credit or bridge loans. Again, perhaps potential funding to pay for senior housing. Life insurance conversion. If you're the beneficiary of a whole life policy and you've accumulated a cash value, you may be able to convert that either into, in some cases, a long-term care insurance, but then also have access to that to help pay for senior housing. And then I put the kids in there. I don't know about you. My kids will not be in a position to help me, but perhaps yours would be. And notice a smiley face. So other items of importance. Mentioned veterans benefits. Again, the aid and attendance. There's also a in-home care benefit for the senior veteran himself, that they could be eligible for up to 12 hours of in-home care paid for by the VA. Some cases, there may be some elder law or estate planning issues. I'll often ask questions about whether a power of attorney is in place. Sometimes if for Medicaid planning purposes, the guidance of an elder law attorney can help, do some estate planning to make sure you maximize the estate. Mentioned power of attorney and healthcare directives, making sure wills and whatnot are in place. the elder law attorneys and attorneys in general were very busy this last year during the pandemic, because as people sat at home, they recognized that perhaps they didn't have all of their essential documents in place, so that they were reviewed. Kind of a thumbnail is that if your power of attorney hasn't been reviewed for 5 years or so or more, that's usually a good time to have it reviewed, just to fine tune it, to make sure the language is current with what the current Illinois law is. Sometimes real estate services are needed. I had a gentleman reach out to me a couple weeks ago, and the only thing he needed help was, he goes, "I'm moving to Iowa. I need help selling my house. Do you know somebody?" So I was happy to share that with him. Downsizing services. So again, if I can't see your hands, but who has a lot of stuff at home? Well, I've got a lot of stuff. In fact, if you can take a look behind me in my makeshift basement office, you see a little bit of my stuff, so to speak. But there are, so if you're relocating from your home and going into senior housing, you're going to have more things than you're going to be able to take. And so there are some wonderful services out there. If you don't have the ability to do that yourself, or the family support to do that, that can help you do that, along with helping manage through the items that you have. They can also assist with packing and moving services as well. In-home care, I've kind of indirectly referred to this a couple of times, but I'm a fervent believer in staying at home as long as possible. That's where you're comfortable. That's what you're familiar with. You're close to all of your, to your friends and family and doctors and the like. So there's some wonderful licensed in-home care agencies in our area. They provide caregivers. These caregivers are their employees. They've been trained. They've been background checked. They've got general liability and workers' compensation insurance taken out on them, and they can pretty much do anything related to your activities of daily living. Okay. They're non-medical, so they can't do physical therapy. They can't do occupational therapy. They can't administer medication or draw blood or take temperature or things of that nature, but they can do just a tremendous amount of things: bathing, dressing, grooming, mobility assistance. They can do light housekeeping and cooking and meal preparation and shopping, and provide transportation to medical appointments. They can do simple things like just being a companion, to help, to be with mom and or dad. They can be there on an hourly basis, shift work, all the way up to and including, 24/7 live-in kind of a care, if that's what's needed.
Rick, we have a question.
Sure.
If there are soft assets, i.e. artwork, musical instruments, etc., are those to be included in one's overall financial status that has to be disclosed?
That's going to vary from one set of documents to the next. I really can't answer that specifically. I would say that you want to share enough financial information with the community to ensure that you're going to gain access to that. Okay. So I guess in one way I'm saying you may not be required to have to divulge everything. Other items of importance, adult day services. I think this is a great, not well-known option for families, where perhaps mom's living at home. Perhaps there's some early onset dementia. Family's a little concerned. Perhaps there's some local adult day service that she can go to that will give her something to look forward to go to. A lot of activities, lunch provided. Perhaps mom or dad is living with the kids and the kids are going on vacation, so perhaps, they need a little help with adult day services to give them a break. How do you go about finding senior communities? Because there's a lot of them out there, right? So you can do the looking yourself. You've seen new buildings going up under construction as you're driving around. You see different properties that may be of interest. You can rely on family and friends, based off of their input, perhaps friends' experience with other loved ones. There's this thing called Google. You may be familiar with. Go out and do an internet search yourself. There are also some senior-related websites that are out there that can help guide you in terms of giving you some assistance. There are online senior placement agencies that can be a little bit more tailored and more hand-holding type of support as you're trying to make this decision, which is a big one. And finally, there's local companies such as Senior Solutions, which are senior placement companies. And so I'll give you a quick 30-second advertisement. I've been helping families for nearly 10 years now, help hundreds and probably thousands if I totaled it up. We're really a matchmaker. We really try to connect families with the services and the senior housing options that make the most sense based off of their circumstances, whether it's geographical or whether it's cost, whether it's level of care. We really try to connect them with the options that make the most sense. And we've got a lot of other resources as well, whether it's legal or downsizing, move management, in-home care, and the like. A lot of tools in the toolkit, if you will. And our services are free. Okay. Yes, I am a for-profit business. My compensation comes on a referral basis. I work with the vast majority of the senior housing properties that are out there, and they compensate me on a referral basis. And because I'm free and no cost, the families that I work with, you can ask all the questions till you're blue in the face, and you're never going to see any kind of an invoice from me. And I really, really love what I do. So here's my contact information. If you have any further questions, you can get a hold of me at that phone number. There's my email, rgraffagna@seniorsolutions3.com. And there's my website as well. So, we're not quite at 7:00, or not 7:00. We started at 7:00. We're not quite at 8:00. So I'm open for any questions that you might have.
All right, we just got one. Are there any neutral medical assessors available when no one agrees? When you can't sell home quickly, will community buy and then sell it?
So I'm sure there are arbiters out there. There are people that have their own case management companies that if there's a really, really big conflict about the medical opinion, that you could hire them to get involved and to try to negotiate a settlement, if you will. Your question about the selling of the house, typically the senior community is not in that type of business, but there are companies that can help that are out there. I know of a couple of companies that can help facilitate the purchase of a house and provide the funding, if you will, to get if it's that important part of the equation in order to move into senior housing. Fortunately, right now that doesn't seem to be much of an issue. Housing industry, the real estate industry continues to be on fire, and at least in my neighborhood, houses are going very, very quickly. But good questions. I appreciate that. What else can I help you guys with? And let me just reinforce, I'm just a little square in the corner of your screen right now, but I really enjoy connecting with families. I really enjoy problem solving and helping you understand what your options are, and developing, solutions that really address the issues at hand. And like I said, I'm really local. I live in Lisle. My office is in Woodridge, so we're neighbors. And if at some point you just have a couple questions to follow up on today, or do have some serious issues you want to talk about loud about, just feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to chat with you. And I want to thank Xavier again for allowing me to under the stewardship of the Lisle Library to offer this information to everybody. Oh, I see a question pop up.
Yes. How much time should be spent looking?
Uh, that I'm chuckling because there's not a good answer for that. First of all, I would say generally speaking, there is availability. Okay, so it's not like you need to rush out and do something and to get yourself on a wait list. So there is availability. Um, I suggest, you know, a good if there's some urgency involved, I would give yourself a good 2+ weeks, to look. If there's no urgency, you can take longer time. There's no there's no commitment to go and check out a property. I kind of call it a kicking the tire kind of a visit. Um, a lot of times there is urgency, circled around safety, that now all of a sudden, we've known that things need to happen and we haven't really addressed it yet. If you think down the road that, senior housing is an option, um, I would seriously consider at least get some of these kicking the tire visits out of the way so you're familiar, and so if and when there's a hair on fire kind of in a situation, you're better prepared. If things do hit a crisis, I've met families, identified a situation, and the loved one moved in 2 or 3 days later. I mean, it can happen that quickly if necessary. We prefer not to do it that way, but the senior housing community is ready to respond, if it's a crisis and someone really needs help. Great questions. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and if you still have a question, feel free to pop it into the Q&A section down below or in the chat. In the chat, I went ahead and placed Rick Graffagna's email address as well as website. And if you still need additional information, someone asked for a transcript of the program. My email's in the chat. Feel free to email me and I'll be more than happy to send you a transcript. And if you forget to copy down any information, you're more than welcome to email me at duranx@lisle.library.org, and I'll be more than happy to send you Rick's information over to you.
Well, good. I think people are wanting to get to their 8 o'clock television program. I don't blame you. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your evening to join us. Looking forward to, if you do have a need down the road, I look forward to helping you. Xavier, thank you very much again for inviting me and let me share some of my knowledge with the group.
Thank you so much, Rick. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone. This program should be available through our YouTube channel soon. With that said, thank you so much again, Rick, and thank you everyone who's joined us this evening.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.